to the courtship of God that is prevenient grace. Imagine all that you've ever done, every mistake you've ever made, every triumph you've ever experienced, every aspect and second of your life as a courtship. God is courting you through prevenient grace. Justifying grace is us accepting that relationship. Responding to this courtship takes an act of faith, whereas prevenient grace requires no faith. Justifying grace is the response to prevenient grace. It's finally acknowledging. This is one of my favorite phrases. It's finally acknowledging that God is God and what? We are not. We respond to God's love. Justifying grace is that essentially the point of conversion. When we say, yes, God, yes, I will follow you. If we go back to that metaphor of chips and salsa, justifying grace is eating the chips and salsa. We don't have to, but we choose to. We choose to take advantage of that which is right in front of us. We choose to follow Christ. We choose to eat the chips and salsa, or we choose to order from the menu if you want to sort of pull back a little bit. We don't have to order, but we do. It's our power. It's our decision. We order. We participate. Another way of thinking of justifying grace is, on like Microsoft Word, you got different settings for the margins. You can do right justified or less justified or just justified. When you have left justified margins, you have a nice beginning surface or one linear. It looks linear. It looks nice and pretty. But on the right-hand side, it's jagged and uneven. Well, if you do justified margins, like they often do in newspapers, the spacing between the words is inconsistent. But the margins on both the left side and the right side are straight, are neat, are made right. So it's just like us in justifying grace. Our response to God, just like the spacing in the sentences, is inconsistent. We respond to God, but it's not always the way we should or even that we do respond. But in the beginning and in the end, through justifying grace, through our acceptance of God's love for us, our agreeing to follow Christ, we, in the beginning and in the end, are made right. We're made justified through justifying grace. Justifying grace is essentially saying, I am, I have been, and I will always be saved by grace. So we have prevenient grace, and we have justifying grace, and we have sanctifying grace. In my opinion, sanctifying grace is the product of justifying grace. Sanctifying grace is when we are made holy. The Book of Discipline says this about sanctifying grace. Sanctifying grace draws us toward the gift of Christian perfection, which Wesley described as, quote, a heart habitually filled with the love of God and the love of neighbor. Do me a favor, get your bulletins if you have one. On the very front, there's that thumbprint cross, right? That's sort of our logo. What's it say below that? It says, be bold. What's the next one? Love God. What's the last one? Serve others. That is sanctifying grace. When we respond to the needs of those around us. Back to chips and salsa, it might be that we ask the waiter or the waitress to sit down so that we may serve them instead. It might be even leaving the restaurant and going to some strange land where they've never heard of chips and salsa and showing them the beauty that is chips and salsa. Or going to a place where they've never heard of the grace of Jesus Christ and showing them the grace, the beauty that is Jesus Christ. Follow, it's the whole reason we have a food bank, or food pantry. That's the reason we go on mission trips. That's the reason we read the Bible. We are made holy. We are responding to others' needs around us. Through prevenient grace, we are given aid before we even know we need it. Through justifying grace, we say yes. We say yes to God. Through sanctifying grace, we respond to the needs of those around us. We believe grace is important. We believe grace is a cornerstone on which all the rest of our theological discussions are based. Grace is the base. I read a story, or I heard a story actually, relatively recently, about a man It's by Philip Gully, but it's about a 70-year-old, mildly mentally handicapped man named Benny. Benny was getting by just fine in life. He got Social Security and even got a little bit of a pension because he worked for a little while. But he just needs help with the everyday stuff. You know, he just can't quite grasp paying bills, and he does well, but he just needs help. So Benny was walking home one day, got his check and cashed it, and brought it home with him. And that night, 2 men broke into his house and beat him, and they took his money. And this was difficult, of course, for anybody to accept that they would do this to lovely, gentle Benny. But for Philip, who was Benny's pastor, it was particularly difficult because the investigators shared with him that likely the people who did this knew Benny. They knew that he'd cashed his check that day. He knew that he would have the cash. And Philip writes that I had to fight my rage as I tried to comfort him. We talked about the attack. We talked about his injuries. We talked about the good prognosis from the doctor. And then as I could tell Benny was getting tired and was ready for me to go, I asked him if I could pray with him. And Benny nodded his head and then through swollen lips said to me, "Don't forget to pray for those men who did it." Sisters and brothers, grace abounds. And amen for that. Amen.